Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we just wrapped up the final regular season weekend of college football. Bittersweet, to say the least. We do still have a lot of postseason football to look forward to, beginning with conference championship weekend. And this episode may be a little bit of a longer one, so strap in. We are, of course, going to start with the normal recap of Week 14, Rivalry Week in college football. But before going into the preview of these conference title games, I do want to cover a couple of other things, most notably all of the coach movement that's been going on and how that's impacting college football overall, and take a look at the playoff picture as it stands. The committee thought they would have a much easier job at this point, and that maybe more teams would have 3 or more losses, but almost none of the contenders lost this past weekend. Spoiler alert to the recap. So we're going to have a lot of difficult decisions for them to make, and I will go through and kind of make the case for or against each team that could be considered on the bubble for one reason or another. Once we preview the conference title games and I give my predictions for those, we will then sort of set the playoff field as I see it and predict that as well. Obviously, we will update that if anything major changes this upcoming weekend, as we will do another episode following those games. But without further ado, let's get into the recap of Week 14. And as always, we begin on a snowy Tuesday, November night in the Midwest, where we've got some action to break down. Not really too much to say about these games, though. The main headline from Tuesday's matchups was that UMass finished 0-12. Probably not a shock to anybody at this point who's been paying attention to them, but arguably one of the worst FBS teams of all time, right up there with 2019 UMass. And in the other matchup that night, Western Michigan punched their ticket to the MAC title game with a 10-point win on the road against rival Eastern Michigan. EMU turned it over in the Western red zone twice in the first half, and that was really the difference in this one, as they actually were statistically the better team. I'm not entirely convinced by this Western Michigan team, but thankfully for them, they only have 2 games left, the conference title and the bowl game. They just find ways to win, and their quarterback is definitely a tough player, gets a lot of short yardage for them in key situations. No games on Wednesday night this week, but we did have one on Thanksgiving. Navy technically kept their American Conference title hopes alive for one more day at least by beating Memphis on the road 28-17. This really completed what was a kind of disappointing season for the Tigers, even though they finished 8-4. At one point, they were the favorite to be the Group of 5 representative in the playoff. They started 6-0. They had a win over Arkansas under their belts, but lose 4 of their last 6 and now no longer have a head coach. Navy, on the other hand, ultimately lost out on a chance to play for the league title, as they needed one of Tulane or North Texas to lose, and both of them easily took care of business against inferior opponents. But still an impressive effort here, especially by the Navy defense, holding the Memphis offense scoreless in the second half. Rivalry week this season was almost split down the middle between Friday and Saturday, as we had 13 games across Friday, a monster slate, and some pretty entertaining results. Not necessarily in the headliner games, but more of the under-the-radar matchups. Kent State and Northern Illinois was a barn burner in the MAC. I gotta give a shout out to Kent State, because going 5-7 may not seem that impressive on the surface, but this was a team that had lost to 26 consecutive FBS opponents coming into the season and finished the season really strong. So congrats to them, possibly some momentum moving forward into 2026. Bet you guys didn't think I would start the Friday recap with Kent State, but That was probably the most notable game of the early window. Utah did survive against Kansas, a valiant effort by the Jayhawks on senior day for Jalen Daniels, but 3 interceptions by him, one of his worst performances of his career. Tough to go out that way, but this is a very talented Utah defense. Felt like the Utes were beating themselves early in this game, and I think the lack of style points here is ultimately going to cost them any chance at a playoff bid. But a 21-point fourth quarter to come back and win was impressive nonetheless. Iowa went into Nebraska and just splattered them 40-16, finishing 8-4. Yet another successful season for Kirk Ferentz. He just finds that window of between 8 and 10 wins nearly every season, it seems. I actually thought this was a spot where Nebraska might bounce back at home after getting drubbed by Penn State the week prior, but it's clear that their run defense needs a lot of work this offseason. Emmett Johnson did have a very impressive performance and finishes with over 1,400 yards in the regular season for them. Unfortunately, not enough of a passing threat and not enough run defense to compete in this one. The Egg Bowl was competitive early between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, but ultimately, the Bulldogs defense just unable to stop Ole Miss all game long. Trinidad Chambliss went up and down the field, throwing for 359 and 4 touchdowns. Kewan Lacey also ran in his 20th of the season, which leads the nation. This Ole Miss offense is explosive and full of playmakers, and we will see if they can carry that over into the playoffs without most of their staff. More on that later, but as for now, Georgia took on Georgia Tech and really kind of just coasted through this game. It felt like they won 16-9. They really didn't press anything. Gunnar Stockton threw for just 70 yards. It was probably the least aggressive I've seen them on offense all season. It looked like they were just ready to get on and into the SEC title game, which they did need a little bit of help from Texas to get in there via tiebreakers, but Georgia will be in Atlanta for the SEC title, and I don't really have much to say about this one. Their defense is certainly ascending, and I wouldn't worry about the offense too much. They've got plenty of playmakers out wide. They just didn't decide to use them in this one. We will certainly see the playbook expand in Atlanta and in the playoffs. The aforementioned North Texas defeated Temple 52-25. Their offense just continues to roll. They've scored 50 plus in 3 straight and 5 of their last 6 games. Their only loss was to South Florida, where they had some fluke turnovers go against them. They've been extremely dominant at home, but also have some blowout road wins mixed in there. Although Temple ended up with 25 points, I thought this was one of North Texas's better defensive efforts of the season. Held the Owls to just 7 first-half points and 144 yards through the air. Last week, I laid out a scenario where Boise State could make it to the Mountain West title game, and that exact scenario happened exactly how they wanted it to. They went into Utah State and squeaked out a 1-point win, 25-24, and they also needed New Mexico to knock off San Diego State. 23-17 was the final there for the Lobos. A somewhat unlikely home win, even though they were only a 1.5-point underdog. New Mexico's win was probably the least dominant statistically across the board, but they will take any W that comes their way. We had a couple of ranked-on-ranked matchups in the night slate, beginning in the SEC, where Texas knocked off Texas A&M 27-17. It has still been a very long time since A&M has knocked off the Horns. I really expected them to finally break the streak here as a 2.5-point favorite on the road. However, this game has once again raised more concerns about Texas A&M's overall strength of schedule. They do have the non-conference win over Notre Dame on the road, which is huge. However, they only played one team in the top half of the SEC's standings because there's way too many teams in these leagues now. and they lost to them, and that was this Texas game. So obviously they can't control who's on their conference schedule. They just play whoever's in front of them, but certainly more doubts being cast upon this team. I think it will allow us to take advantage of some softer lines with them in the playoffs. Texas, on the other hand, I had been warning for weeks that there would be a media campaign to potentially get them into the field, and there still is, but they don't really have much bite to it because they're a 3-loss team, and as it looks right now, there's going to be several 2-loss teams left out of this field. No real argument for Texas anymore. And a big winner for the podcast. My favorite pick of Friday night was Arizona going into Arizona State and winning as a slight road favorite. Arizona really just controlled the clock from start to finish. They held it for almost 40 minutes of a 60-minute game. They had double ASU's first downs. Their defense just clamped down on ASU every time they touched the ball, held them to just over 200 total yards and 7 points. So that was the biggest question mark about this Arizona team coming into the season, whether they could perform on the defensive side of the ball, and that's actually been their biggest strength this year. This easily could have been a bigger margin had Arizona not fumbled in the red zone and missed a field goal in the first quarter. They also had another field goal blocked in the second quarter. So in the end, they made no doubt that they were clearly the better team here. 9-3 season, incredible turnaround for Brett Brennan and his staff. And the last game to quickly comment on from Friday night, Indiana just does what Indiana does, beating Purdue 56-3. They ran for 355 yards. Nobody's going to take them in the Big Ten title game, but I'm very excited for that matchup against Ohio State this weekend. Speaking of Ohio State, let's rip the Band-Aid off and move over to Saturday. We got to start with the game. It looked early on like the curse may continue for the Buckeyes. Ryan Day gave a very cocky answer to the interview in the pregame, saying they were going to come out and be aggressive this time. And on their first possession, Julian Sand threw an interception right into the hands of Jair Hill, set up the Wolverines for their second scoring drive, but both of them field goals, unfortunately. That's been the issue trying to score against Ohio State all season. You can move the ball on them between the 20s, but their red zone defense has been elite. Once Ohio State settled into the game, it was clear that for the first time in 6 years, they had the advantage in the trenches. Michigan unable to get any type of pass rush all game long. And once Jordan Marshall went down with an injury, he was already banged up coming into the game, but very limited after the first couple of drives. The Michigan offense completely stalled out. The play calling was extremely conservative throughout the game. And as a result, the Wolverines finished with just 163 total yards and went 1 for 9 on third down. Ohio State, once again, really didn't have to do a whole lot as it's been all season. Offense just relaxes, takes their time, and puts up 27 points, 10 in the second half. They took off a ton of clock on those drives, and they dominate this game, break the streak, and complete a 12-0 season the year after winning a national championship. So clearly the number one program in America right now. We'll see if they can finish the job for a back-to-back national championship. A couple of early games featured some SEC teams against some ACC teams. You would think the SEC would have the advantage typically in those matchups, but both of them went the ACC's way. Clemson, slightly more competitive game here as they went to South Carolina, beat them 28-14. They were a slight underdog in this game, but this was the rare occurrence where the ACC roster was actually more talented, and it seems as though Dabo Swinney has figured out a way to finish these seasons strong even when they have disappointed early the last couple of years. Only a 7-5 finish for Clemson, but once again, some decent momentum heading into next season. you can bet that the hype train will be fired up and ready to go once again in 2026. And for the less competitive game, I have to throw this one in there. Kentucky, what happened? They were playing so much better offensively down the stretch, and then they went to Louisville and lost 41-0. Really could not get anything going. 147 yards. That's it, the entire game. Louisville defensively has not looked like this in weeks, but stood up strong, finished 8-4 even after choking away their chance at an ACC title. Congrats to them on the rivalry week, and unfortunate for Kentucky, they will not play in a bowl game now. Speaking of the ACC, we had a ranked on ranked matchup that was not remotely close. Miami went up to Pittsburgh, and despite the cold weather concerns, they just destroyed the Panthers 38-7, left no doubt out there. Put up as many style points as they possibly could. We'll see how much the committee takes that into account when they drop their rankings on Tuesday. We'll discuss that a little bit more further in the show. Speaking of style points, Texas Tech just went in and body bagged West Virginia 49-0. This Mountaineers team felt like they were playing better the second half of the season, but nothing really positive to take out of this game. One of the more dominant stat sheets that you'll look at all season. Staying in the Big 12 for a second, shout out to Houston and Willie Fritz for finishing 9-3. Year 2 of the project there in the Big 12 is going very well. He had a good defense in year 1. Now year 2, he's got a little bit more offense. Year 3, got to find a more consistent option at quarterback in my opinion, but Connor Wigman has done an admirable job, all things considering. Baylor, another team that needed a win to get to a bowl, and they will finish 5-7 as a result here. Just a disappointing year, but Dave Aranda re-upped for another year in 2026. Important result in the Conference USA, probably the best matchup of the season, Western Kentucky versus Jacksonville State. Win and you're into the conference title game for both teams in this one, and ultimately it was Jacksonville State coming away with a 3-point win at home, 37-34. They trailed 21-7 early in this one, but to me always felt like they were the better team. It just took them a little bit of time to catch up, but ultimately their defense won it for them in the second half, held Western Kentucky without a touchdown after giving up 28 in the first half. Quick shout out to Boston College. This was one of our favorite bets of last week, both on the podcast and on our space Saturday morning. BC went into Syracuse and really controlled this game, won it 34-12, and it's notable because this is their first and only FBS win of the season. They did beat Fordham in their opener, but that hardly counts, so there you go, an ACC win for them. Syracuse, the quarterback situation got very dire towards the end of the season, and the roster depth is very depleted. A lot of work for Fran Brown to be done this offseason. And another afternoon result in the ACC that was very notable was Duke beating Wake Forest 49-32. Pretty entertaining game for most of this one. Robbie Ashford actually put up 342 passing yards on that Duke defense. But the Blue Devils, funny enough, punched their ticket to the ACC title game with this win. They are just 7-5, but they have a chance to be a conference winner. They do have the best offense in this league, at least by total points scored. But this is an absolute disaster situation for the ACC. Over in the Big 12, TCU pretty much handled Cincinnati 45-23. Nice win on senior day there for the Horned Frogs. Everything about this game we pretty much could have predicted from the preseason. We nailed both of these teams as far as the offseason preview pod goes. TCU, we had to get to 8 wins, and that's exactly what they got to here. 8-4 is the final record. Cincinnati started 7-1. Told you guys that they had a backloaded schedule, though, and they finished the season with 4 straight losses. to finish 7-5. A lot of uncertainty there, especially once Brendan Sorsby either transfers or declares for the NFL. I suppose there's a chance he comes back to Cincinnati, but still not sure about the future of that program. Down in the SEC, once again, we had a ranked-on-ranked matchup in the afternoon. Vanderbilt's going on the road to Tennessee and really manhandling them at the line of scrimmage. This was very entertaining to watch from a closet Vanderbilt fan perspective. They ran for over 300 yards in this game. The game was tied 21 apiece at halftime, but Vandy won it 45-24. It was really never in doubt, in my opinion. And it's kind of unfortunate that we're not going to see this team in the college football playoffs. They did lose 2 regular season games, so they can't fault anybody but themselves. They didn't play as hard of a schedule as some of these other 2-loss teams either. However, Diego Pavia has been playing lights out, and it would have been fun to see him in the field. In the Big Ten, Oregon punched their ticket to the playoffs, finishing 11-1 with a 26-14 win over Washington. This Huskies team just has not been able to scale their explosive offense against good defenses. It's been a problem all season long. They've put up 40+ in 3 of their last 5 games, but against Ohio State, 6 points. Against Michigan, 7 points. Even going to Wisconsin, they only put up 10, and then in this spot, just 14. So an 8-4 year, they were clearly better than some teams, but when they faced better competition, they just were not able to scale. Speaking of punching tickets, as we move into the night slate, Virginia continues to play their best football at the right time. Ever since the loss to Wake Forest, I feel like they've played their 2 best games now. They will now face a rematch of the team they just played 2 games ago in Duke. We'll see if they can beat them for a second time. Another game, another ticket punched. Alabama wins the Iron Bowl 27-20. The main takeaway from this game, if you watched it, really felt like the most fortunate team in the country versus the most unlucky team in America, and that is Auburn. Somehow, a top 10 to 15 talent roster in America is not going to a bowl game. They finished 5-7 with this loss. Alabama put up just 280 in total yardage. 411 for Auburn was their total. Alabama just 4 for 17 on 3rd down in this game. The Auburn defense played with so much heart throughout. They just could not catch a break with penalties, turnovers, unfortunate bounces, reviews, you name it for this Auburn team. It's been the same story all season long. They just cannot catch a break. They finished their season with a fumble on the last drive. Couldn't be more fitting. So Alabama, they will be in the playoffs more than likely. However, the lack of conviction in this win combined with some of their other results down the stretch may call that into question more than we're looking at right now. Tulane hosted Charlotte with a chance to get into the American Conference title game, and they won easily 27-0. Pretty much sleptwalked through this game offensively. The defense stood up strong and held Charlotte to just 140 total yards and -3 on the ground. So Charlotte, definitely one of the most miserable programs in America right now. I have them rated as the 2nd worst team above UMass only. Tulane will be in the American Conference game, as I said. However, to me, they're showing a few more signs, at least on offense, of being distracted by their coach leaving than North Texas. We'll get into that game a little bit more shortly. And the last big result of Saturday night was California. The Golden Bears with the upset of the weekend, knocking off number 21 SMU and knocking them out of the ACC title picture, potentially knocking the ACC out of the playoffs as a whole. The conference had to be pissed about this result, but a 38-35 win, and their young quarterback shines again. Sangapolutelli throws for 330 and 4 touchdowns. They were solid on the ground as well, had enough balance to keep SMU guessing, and controlled the ball for 37 minutes in this one. SMU tried to make a comeback in the fourth quarter, and they did briefly grab the lead back with about 2 minutes to go, but a masterful touchdown drive led once again by Sangapolutelli, and the Golden Bears take the lead back with 40 seconds to go and never look back. Huge win for them. Terrible result for the conference. All right, before we take a look at these conference title matchups this upcoming weekend, I want to briefly talk about these coaching hires. And my first point here is the biggest problem with all of this is the calendar itself. It is insane to me that we have a time period where we're going into conference championship weekend and coaches of teams, some of which that are playing in these games, are leaving to go to other programs, some of which are rivals in the same conference. It's unrestricted free agency, but coaches, we also have that for players, just at a different time, which is also probably not the best time to have it. We got a lot to fix with this calendar, and at the bare minimum, we need to push back the coaching moves to after the season is over. I understand that this is still universities, and you do have to take academic scheduling into account. But what we have right now just feels like the Wild West, and I don't think anybody's happy about these situations. So definitely a lot of work that needs to be done. Just feels like pure chaos in this sport right now. And I think that's what happens when you don't have some sort of central governing structure like you do in any other sport. I'm going full Josh Pate here, but make that man the commissioner of this sport, or somebody, whoever you want. Nick Saban, if you want to step up. I feel like he's fully retired at this point. But we need a commissioner of the sport that actually cares about college football as a whole, and we won't have so much of the individual conferences lobbying for their individual teams rather than the good of the sport overall. With all that being said, let's take a quick look at each individual coaching hire. I'll just give a quick take. We obviously don't know whether any of these hires will work out or all of them will fail, but I will give my best guess as to which ones will and which ones will not find success at their new programs. Lane Kiffin to LSU is obviously the headliner. I don't understand this move entirely, other than the history of LSU is greater than Ole Miss, but what Lane has done in Oxford is unprecedented, and he could literally win a national championship this season if he chose not to leave. He will, of course, have all of the resources necessary to win at LSU, as any coach does. They've won national championships with multiple coaches in recent memory. Brian Kelly couldn't get it done, but wouldn't be shocked to see Lane do it. I just will not be rooting for him to do so. Moving over to Ole Miss seems like the logical next step here, and they decided to hire internally, promoting their defensive coordinator, Pete Golding. He does seem like a decent culture fit with the program. The first speech was not exactly inspiring, but that's not necessarily an indicator of how good of a football coach he is. I'm not sure how this one is going to turn out long term, but in the short term, I think we'll have a good opportunity to kind of buy low on all of this news surrounding Ole Miss as they head into the playoffs. Still an extremely talented roster. Continuing through the SEC hires, Florida picks up John Summerall from Tulane. Some reports say they were initially the favorite to land Lane Kiffin, but potentially passed on him. As a Gator fan, John Summerall has been my pick since week 2 of this season, so I'm not bothered here. He's been a great coach everywhere he's been. He's got experience in the SEC as a defensive assistant, both for Ole Miss and for Kentucky, where he contributed to some very good defenses that also beat Florida several times when he was there. He was the head coach at Troy for 2 years, won the Sun Belt both years, and now at Tulane, he's in the conference title game once again. He's obviously ascended very quickly, but I think he can recruit very well at Florida and obviously been impressive what he's done on the field as well. Probably the best hire on the surface in this conference, in my opinion, is Alex Golish, the South Florida head coach, going to Auburn. This job has a ton of potential, and he's walking into what is already a very talented roster. It is always tough to be the coach at Auburn because you know you're always going to play both Georgia and Alabama every year. But this guy recruits at an incredibly high level. He's done it everywhere he's gone, especially when he was at Tennessee as the offensive coordinator. He brings a high tempo offense to Auburn, which is something they've had success with in the past. I think it's very realistic to expect Auburn to be back in the upper ranks of the SEC in year one under Alex Golish. And the hire in the SEC I probably have the most questions about is Ryan Silverfield to Arkansas. I would say he underachieved at Memphis. I haven't really been impressed with him as an in-game coach there. They obviously started 6-0, now finished 8-4. It's been kind of that situation every year at Memphis under his leadership. He is off to an incredible recruiting start here at Arkansas, though. 3 big commitments on day one, and he's got just a couple more days to put together this class. We'll see what he can do and if he can align the money that exists in that state and turn it into some more on-field production for this program. One hire to cover in the Big 12 is Eric Morris going to Oklahoma State. I thought this was a phenomenal pickup for them. He has coached a ton of NFL caliber quarterbacks. He's developed great offensive systems. He's leading one of the best offenses in America right now at North Texas. Oklahoma State needs a spark desperately, and I think they just got one with this hire. They've been playing better in recent weeks, and I don't think it's a coincidence. Things looking up again for the Cowboys. A couple of hires in the Big Ten. You've got Bob Chesney, the James Madison head coach, going out to UCLA. From everything that I've seen, this seems like a very good fit. However, I don't know what the ceiling is. If you can recruit LA somehow, then maybe you can get into a tier 2 position in the Big Ten. It is nice to see them care a little bit about football. I just don't know what the ceiling is for this program at the current moment. And another hire that I think was fantastic is Pat Fitzgerald going to Michigan State. I know he didn't necessarily have the most amazing record on paper at Northwestern, but let's be real, this is Northwestern. It's really hard to win there, and he did win most seasons. He had some down years for sure. Can't win every year at a place like that, but he took them to multiple Big Ten title appearances, and that's not something that they've been able to repeat since then. He's a good fit for Michigan State. He's obviously extremely experienced in the Big Ten. And as a Wolverines fan, I am very nervous about this one. Jonathan Smith is out the door, and this is a big upgrade in my opinion. Good for MSU. We'll see if the rivalry gets back to being competitive again. Out west, we had a couple of pretty surprising hires, beginning with Oregon State picking up Alabama's offensive coordinator, Jamarcus Shepard. This was not at all the direction that I was expecting them to go, so I was caught off guard by this one a little bit. I can't imagine what would be too urgent about building up Oregon State here in the next couple of weeks compared to preparing your team for the playoffs, but that is the decision that's being made here, and solid hire for Oregon State. And arguably the best hire of the entire cycle to this point, Colorado State picking up Jim Mora from UConn. I don't understand this move entirely. I feel like Mora probably could have gotten a Power 4 job. However, there is a ton of money at Colorado State. They've got really nice facilities and probably better ones incoming at some point, and he's a really good football coach. So, this is the second time that Colorado State has poached a high level coach. Didn't work out with Norvell. I think it'll work out this time. And the hire that I know the absolute least about is Stanford, going with Tavita Pritchard. Very young coach, and once again going the NFL route here, taking over for a former NFL guy, an interim coach, Frank Reich. This is the Washington Commanders quarterbacks coach. He did play at Stanford, so this is his alma mater. I really have no guess as to whether he will succeed here or not. And one more hire that is old news now, but I'll just bring it up because I think it's funny that everyone just assumes that this is a slam dunk for Virginia Tech getting James Franklin. He is already recruiting at a high level there and probably will elevate them from what they were previously, but I don't know if I would be 100% bought in based on what we've seen in recent years at Penn State. And speaking of Penn State, it's still an open job at the moment, probably the highest profile job remaining that is still open. Starting to hear some noise about Kalani Sitake, the coach at BYU, one of the most underrated in the sport. I was kind of surprised to hear that noise. I didn't really expect to see him leave BYU at any time soon, but Penn State would be a better job, and maybe he's seeing the way that BYU is being treated in these polls and wonders if he'll ever be able to win it all there. So, potential there for that move, but Penn State, to me, surprising that it's still an open job. Kentucky is now an open job after firing Mark Stoops. I know that they would love to get Will Stein, the offensive coordinator from Oregon. I don't know that that's going to happen, and they may have to wait a little bit if that is the case anyways. Either way, I actually expect Kentucky to get a pretty decent candidate here. I think it's an underrated job in obviously the toughest league in America, but also the best league in terms of where you want to be competing and giving yourself the best chance to make the college football playoff. And some other jobs that are open right now, some lower caliber jobs, I would say. Cal is open. Justin Wilcox fired before this last game where they beat SMU, finished 7-5. I was kind of surprised to see them let him go. Might be some other things in the works there. And then some G5 jobs. North Texas obviously will have to replace Eric Morris. Memphis with Ryan Silverfield. Tulane and South Florida with John Summerall and Alex Golish. UAB still has not replaced Trent Dilfer to this point. And then Coastal Carolina recently fired Tim Beck. So keep an eye out for those openings to start filling up. And there will probably be some other current head coaches that move that open up other jobs, which is why we call it the carousel. It'll continue to move, and we'll provide another update in the next episode. All right, as we look ahead to the playoff rankings this upcoming Tuesday, I'm recording this before that, and it'll be posted before that. So if you're listening to this, this is sort of a look ahead to that. I don't really expect much to change here. The only team in the top 14 to lose a game was number 3 Texas A&M, and it was their first regular season loss of the season. They're not going to drop them out of the top 10. So really not much expected in terms of changes on Tuesday night. From my perspective, I think A&M will probably slot in at number 7, right behind Ole Miss and ahead of Oklahoma. As far as playoff locks go, Ohio State is in, they're 12-0. Indiana, same thing. No matter what happens in the Big Ten title game, both of those teams will be in and likely will both get a first-round bye. Georgia is in no matter what happens in Atlanta. Texas Tech, I believe, is in regardless of the outcome of the Big 12 game. And Oregon is 100% in the Big Ten at 11-1. You'll also have 2 more automatic bids. One will be taken up by the American Conference winner between North Texas and Tulane. And then the other one will either be Virginia if they win the ACC, or it'll be James Madison from the Sun Belt. I don't think you're going to see an 8-5 Duke team in the playoff field. Everyone else on this list could technically be considered a quote-unquote bubble team. And we'll start with Ole Miss. Not really much of a case to be made here for them not to make the playoffs at 11-1 in the SEC. You only lose one game in that conference. To me, you're clearly one of the 12 best teams in America. However, we did see in the past when it was just a 4-team field where the committee punished Florida State, who was 12-0 undefeated, for not having their quarterback healthy. How will the committee judge Ole Miss without their head coach, Lane Kiffin, and a lot of his staff as well, leaving to go to LSU? Given that there are so many 2-loss teams here in the mix, many of which have very strong resumes, there is a slight chance that Ole Miss gets left out of the field. I don't think it's going to happen, but there's a slight chance. Same thing could be said about Texas A&M. I think they're solidly in the field at 11-1, but the fact that they finished the season with a loss and it was the only team that they faced in the top half of the conference standings all year and they lost it, not a lot of quality wins within the conference. I think the head-to-head result with Notre Dame will keep them above the Irish and in the field. Oklahoma is 10-2 and the highest ranked 2-loss team, and in my opinion for good reason. They have played an absolute gauntlet of a schedule. They played Michigan in the non-conference and beat them. They beat Alabama on the road. They beat Tennessee on the road. They beat Missouri, LSU, and Auburn all at home. So a very solid resume, one of the toughest schedules in America. Oklahoma more than likely will be in the playoffs. Now is when it really starts to get interesting because Notre Dame is the number 9 team currently. They have a head-to-head loss to number 12, Miami. That was week 1, opening week of the season. It was in Miami. The Canes won by 3 points. And Notre Dame had multiple turnovers. Not saying that has anything to do with the committee's calculus here. I do think Notre Dame has a sizable edge in their resume, though. Their only 2 losses are that game, and then by 1 point at home to A&M. They've won 10 straight games. They've beaten 2 AP Top 25 ranked teams in that time. And Miami, who I guess I'll talk about next, has lost 2 games in ACC play. We're talking about a conference that may not get a team into the field at all. So I think there's a reason Miami is multiple spots behind Notre Dame. I completely agree with it, even though the head-to-head win, you could say, is a defining feature here. I think there's more to the resumes, especially as we've gotten deeper into the season. I think Notre Dame is clearly the better team right now and arguably the best team in the country. You could have a situation where you have a 12-team field and maybe the best team is not in it still. So I think you got to have the Irish in there. They're playing better than anyone right now. Things would have been a lot easier if Miami had made it into the ACC title game, because then they would take that auto bid spot away from either Virginia or James Madison, I guess, in this case. But as it stands, I don't really see a path forward to Miami making it in here. I don't know why the committee would just randomly have them jump over the teams in front of them based on this past week. I wouldn't say their result was any more impressive than what the Irish have done the past couple of weeks. Next up is Alabama. They are also 10-2 in the SEC. They do have an impressive stretch of wins there on the road at Georgia, on the road at Missouri. They beat Vanderbilt. They beat Tennessee. However, they do have one of the worst losses of any of the potential playoff teams. At Florida State has not aged well at all. That's a 5-7 ACC team. They also struggled down the stretch, losing at home to Oklahoma and struggling against the Iron Bowl, not being the better team statistically for most of that game. if it wasn't Alabama and if they weren't a team that was left just barely on the outside looking in last year, I think there would be more of an argument to keep the Tide out right now. I certainly would not have them ahead of BYU in my own rankings, but that's the way it stands, and I don't really see a way that the committee changes it. Speaking of BYU, 11-1, and they're currently sitting outside the field looking in. They need help. They need one of these teams above them to get knocked down. They're going into the Big 12 title game looking out. So the way that people have been framing it is if they lose that game, they'll be knocked out of the field. They're not even in the field right now, even at 11-1 in a major conference. I'm really not sure how we've gotten to this point where they're so underranked. Their only loss is on the road against a top 5 team in Texas Tech. They've got multiple ranked wins, including against Utah, another bubble team. So BYU fans have every right to be frustrated right now, and they were in a very similar situation last year, had an argument to make it in the field in 2024, and it appears for back-to-back seasons, they're going to be left on the outside looking in. To me, this is the most underrated team, and maybe they'll just go out and beat Texas Tech this weekend. That would throw a major wrench into the committee's plans. And the two teams that ultimately have no path to get back in at the moment is Utah and Vanderbilt. The Utes have the head-to-head loss to BYU, who is also outside the field, so there's no way they're jumping them with a worse record. They're not in their conference title game, so they have no ability to add to their resume at this point. And the same goes for Vandy, just not as difficult of a schedule as some of the other SEC powerhouses have played at the top. They did just get a road win at Tennessee, which is a nice addition to the resume, but they needed to win against Texas. That was the key, and unfortunately lost that one by 3 on the road. You could make an argument this is the best offense in America, though, so you would, from a neutral fan perspective, like to see them in the playoffs. Just not going to happen, unfortunately. All right, now that we've broken that down, let's take a look at the conference championship games upcoming this weekend. We have 4 games on Friday and then 5 on Saturday. Really not a big fan of these splits of the games, especially considering almost all the games on Friday start basically at the same time. Got to space them out a little bit more for ideal viewership, in my opinion. But we'll start in the Conference USA. This game doesn't have any playoff implications, but still a huge game for Kennesaw State. Their second season in Division 1, looking to accomplish something that not many teams have done, winning a conference title already. They opened as a slight underdog, and this game will be played in Jacksonville, Alabama against Jacksonville State, but Kennesaw currently sits as a 2.5-point favorite. I strongly feel like they will win this game, but Jacksonville State does have the best running back in this league. I just think the Owls have a big edge defensively, so give me Kennesaw to win the game. James Madison just needs to keep their focus for one more game against Troy as Bob Chesney is headed out the door. They wanted to keep those rumors quiet in order to keep the focus on this game. Unfortunately, the national media decided to throw it out there and not respect the wishes of the teams involved, but James Madison's still a 22.5-point favorite in this game. They absolutely should take care of business against an 8-4 Troy team that probably overachieved a little bit this year and certainly was not expecting to be in this game. JMU will own this game defensively if they are fully focused. Over in the Mountain West, we have a short-term future from last week. Boise State to win the Mountain West at plus 425. They are now minus 170 in this game against UNLV, so some incredible one-week value that we secured there. I do strongly feel that Boise will win this game. UNLV's massively overachieved all year and are extremely vulnerable defensively. Boise has a huge edge on that side of the ball and a talent gap overall, so give me the Broncos minus the 3. This is also another situation where they get to play this game at home. And clearly the game of the night on Friday will be North Texas against Tulane. Two high-powered offenses, very limited defenses, but should be an absolutely thrilling battle between two very good teams. The American Conference is right up there with the ACC this year in terms of being the fourth best league in the country. We've been high on the Mean Green all season. This is obviously a natural hedge spot for us as they are a slight 2.5-point favorite in this game, and we have them 60-1 to make the college football playoffs. So we will be hedging with Tulane, but obviously rooting very hard for the Mean Green. All right, let's get into the heavy hitters on Saturday, and by that, of course, I mean the MAC championship game between Miami of Ohio and Western Michigan. Two teams that are extremely limited offensively, both like to run the ball. Their defenses both very solid. Miami, Ohio's quarterback opted out of the rest of the season about 3 weeks ago to prepare for the NFL draft, supposedly. This total sits at 43.5. I would be surprised if we got there with these two teams. Should be a slugfest, although I will say it'll be played indoors in Detroit, which is normal for a conference title game, but most of these MAC games are played outdoors in cold weather in the middle of the week in front of not many fans. So maybe there will be a little bit more scoring here than your typical MACtion matchup. Over in the Big 12, we have a rematch kicking off at noon between BYU and Texas Tech. The Red Raiders just owned this matchup the first time. 29-7 was the final, but it could have been a lot worse. Texas Tech had plenty of opportunities to run up the score, and they had to settle for a lot of field goals. BYU really struggled at the line of scrimmage, and they were just 3 of 14 on third down. They ran for just 2.5 yards per carry, but they have really responded in a major way ever since then. Their two best performances of the season followed that game against TCU and Cincinnati. Started slow this weekend against UCF, but ultimately ended up winning that one by 20 points as well. Their offense is playing at another level, and I think that is mostly because of their true freshman, Bear Bachmeier. He's been incredibly efficient the last few weeks, and if he can add some more balance to this offense, I think they'll actually be much more competitive this time with Texas Tech. I do think Tech will probably win the game, but I love BYU to cover the 13.5. If it ever gets to 14, that will definitely be a play for me on Saturday. In the afternoon, we've got an SEC rematch, Georgia and Alabama. Can Georgia finally beat this team? It's been a real struggle for Kirby Smart. He's only beaten them once in his entire career, and that was in the national championship game. He is yet to beat Kalen DeBoer, and yet Georgia is a 2.5-point favorite in this game. As I said earlier, I haven't really been impressed by the way that Alabama has finished the season. There was a point during that run where I felt like they may be the best team in America and certainly the best passing attack with Simpson and their receivers, but they just seem to be a little bit out of sync right now. Ryan Williams isn't seeing the field too much. They're struggling in pass protection, and Georgia is an ascending team right now, especially defensively, so give me the dogs here. Over in the ACC, I mentioned this one a little bit earlier, but we've got Virginia against Duke, only laying 3 or 3.5 points here on a neutral field. Duke was a favorite at home in this matchup by 5.5 points just 3 weeks ago. So this line has moved way too much. I know Virginia dominated that game, but to me, Duke still has the better offense here, and at their peak, they are the better team overall. So I will be taking the Blue Devils and rooting for the chaos situation where the ACC completely gets left out of the playoff. And for the final game of Championship Saturday, the big one, number 1 versus number 2, Ohio State versus Indiana for the Big Ten Championship game in Indianapolis. Ohio State currently sits at about a 5.5-point favorite in this game. However, if you look at some of the sharper books, and by the time this podcast drops, It'll probably be all the books because they typically follow these leading indicators. They have it at 4.5. And despite all the public money that's going to come in on Ohio State, I expect this number to continue to shrink. I will be unloading on Indiana plus 5.5. You cannot give this team this many points. I understand Ohio State has been very dominant. So has Indiana, and they're much more battle tested. If you really look into their resume, this is not the Indiana team of last year that got wiped off the field by Ohio State. They will be able to match the physicality at the line of scrimmage. They are truly what Michigan has been of the previous few seasons. A lot of attention for Fernando Mendoza, and he's probably going to win the Heisman as their quarterback, but this is a run-heavy team. They love to run the ball consistently. They love to stuff the run, and that's how you beat this Ohio State team. You win at the line of scrimmage. This IU team has gone on the road and beaten Iowa and Oregon and Penn State and played in close games, had to come back to win several of those. Ohio State has played from in front all season long. So what happens when that IU offense comes out and punches them in the mouth right away? We will see. If they can't score in the red zone like nobody has, then it's going to be your typical Ohio State game that we've seen all year. I just can't see them pulling away from Indiana as good as they've been this year. Ohio State hasn't been explosive on offense. Indiana has been, so if they fall behind early, I have much more confidence in their ability to come back than I do about Ohio State trailing for the first time all season. So give me the Hoosiers plus 5.5 and the money line. They will win this game outright and secure the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. And for our final segment tonight, before we close out the podcast for the regular season and finish looking ahead to the postseason, I'm going to just apply all of those results, all of our predictions for this upcoming weekend. It is always possible that we get these games wrong. Ohio State could obviously beat Indiana, Alabama could beat Georgia, Tulane could beat North Texas, and Virginia could beat Duke. Even BYU could beat Texas Tech. Who knows? But we are going to apply my predictions and fill out the college football playoff field and give an initial prediction here. The first time I've done this all season. I love the college football regular season. That's what I would love the main focus to be on. It's not really the reality anymore, but I'm going to try and maintain that as much as possible. So for the first time all season, let's give a little playoff field breakdown and prediction. All right, so in this situation, Indiana locks up the number 1 seed. Georgia, I believe, would jump up to number 2 as the SEC champion with only 1 loss. I think Ohio State would slot in at number 3, losing the final game, but not dropping too far, just behind the 2 Power 2 champions. Texas Tech remains at number 4 after beating BYU. Oregon would be my number 5 seed, Ole Miss at 6, Texas A&M 7, Oklahoma 8, Notre Dame 9, Alabama 10, North Texas at number 11, and then James Madison at 12. Remember, if Duke wins in this situation, I believe the ACC is completely out of this. So in the first round, you have Oregon, I believe, would beat James Madison in this situation. Ole Miss as well, even with all the distractions, would, I think, beat North Texas. Texas A&M, I think, would beat Alabama. This would be probably an unpopular pick, given that the Aggies lost their final game, and there's a lot of talk about them being frauds. I think they would respond very well in a home environment there against a fellow SEC team, one that they did not face off against this year, so I don't think the committee would be too hesitant in matching those two teams up. I think that would be just fine. And then the 8-9 matchup, Oklahoma hosting Notre Dame. I believe I've seen the look-ahead line on this as Notre Dame being a pick'em. I would love to bet them at even money in that matchup. Oklahoma's offense is pretty limited in my opinion, and as we've talked about before, Notre Dame may be the most complete team in the country. With those first round results, that leads us into the quarterfinals where the number 1 seed Indiana, not exactly a place you want to be, not a desirable spot in the bracket in that 1 spot. With the way things are set up with the auto bids, the 8-9 game is usually a matchup of two of the best at-large teams, and that's exactly what you're going to get here. A potential rematch setting up with Indiana and Notre Dame from the playoff last year. Unfortunately, I wouldn't love the Hoosiers' chance again there. I think Notre Dame would find a way to continue that momentum. I like the advantage of playing a first round game versus having a bye. Texas Tech, as the 4 seed, would face the 5 seed Oregon, and this would be a major heavyweight matchup. Texas Tech's defense is the biggest thing that's been elevated to allow them to truly compete at a national level. Oregon is obviously loaded with talent. Haven't been the most tested team necessarily this year, but they're obviously looking to redeem themselves after a rough showing in this bracket last year. And on the other side, the 2nd seed Georgia would face the 7th seed Texas A&M, another SEC matchup, but another one that A&M did not play in the regular season. I think the Dogs would take care of business here. Again, could give a little bit of advantage maybe for A&M to have the game under their belt rather than the bye. But Georgia, to me, is clearly the best team in the SEC at this current moment, so I'll take the Dogs. And then the 3 seed Ohio State would play the 6 seed Ole Miss, and I think this is probably where the Rebels' run would come to a close, but it would be very interesting if that offense gets that tempo going and could actually make Ohio State a little bit uncomfortable on that side of the ball for the first time really all year. That would be the only path to victory for me, to see the Rebels do so, but would obviously be rooting for them to do so in that game. Realistically, I think Ohio State wins and advances to the semifinals where they would face Georgia. Another rematch of recent memory where Georgia squeaked by them on a last-second shanked field goal by the Buckeyes. Rematch here, I think Ohio State gets it done, unfortunately, and finds themselves back in the national championship game. And on the other side of the bracket, you would have Oregon, who I think would just squeak by Texas Tech, and they would play Notre Dame. And this is where the Ducks' run would come to an end. Another Big Ten team knocked off by Notre Dame, which gives us a rematch of last year's national championship game. This is a nightmare situation for me as a Michigan fan, first and foremost. But we've got Notre Dame and Ohio State for the 2nd year in a row, and I've got the Irish getting their revenge and winning it all. You can get them at 10-1 to win the national championship still at this current moment. I believe that number is inflated due to the possibility that they still may not even make it into the field at all. But once they're announced in, that number is going to come way down. So buy your Irish stock now. I think they're going to make it in, and they can absolutely beat any team that they match up against. All right, everybody, I know this was a much longer episode than usual. Appreciate everybody for sticking around. If you made it to this point, you are a real one for sure. Thank you to everybody for tuning in all season long. This is the final regular season recap, but as I said earlier, we will recap the conference championship games as well and look ahead officially to the final playoff field. As always, I hope that you learned something from this podcast. And if you want a more thorough breakdown of all of these conference title games, be sure to join our space on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We do those every single week live on Twitter. My handle is at DailyCFBCBB, so I will see all of you over there. But until then, have a great rest of your day.